Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel Ink and Pages. Today I'm going to be talking you through the 6 books I have read between January and mid-March. Unfortunately, not starting off very strong this year. First of all, I read Storyland, a new mythology of Britain by Amy Jeffs, which, first things first, is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it is arguably too big and too heavy, and I'm not a fan of books being massive for the sake of being massive, but the cover is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorite covers I've read in a while, and also the book has a really cool map on the inside cover with the UK, and it shows where all of the stories take place. So yeah, first things first, it's a beautiful book. This was an interesting reading experience, but unfortunately it turned out to be more frustrating and confusing than enjoyable, and annoyingly I'm still having a lot of trouble putting my finger on exactly what it was that didn't work for me, like what precisely I really didn't get on with. So I'm going to try and express my thoughts as eloquently as possible, but bear in mind that I don't really know what I'm trying to say. So I'm giving this book 2.5 stars. The writing was quite good, I think. Overall it was a positive. It was quite lyrical and poetic in some points. Another pro for this book is that it actually had quite a lot of stories I'd never heard of before, and that is probably the only reason I'm keeping it. On the other hand, a lot of those stories did feel very, very similar in that it was like, oh, here's a British / Celtic / Irish king. Oh no, someone's killed him and now he's been avenged. I'm pretty sure that exact series of events happened like 8 to 10 times in 30 stories. After each of the stories in here is a little piece of writing by the author where she will discuss it in some way, maybe why she chose that story, what elements really struck her about it, the original source of the story. In some cases, she actually went to visit the locations around the UK where the myth is meant to have taken place. And some of these discussions were quite interesting. I particularly liked it when she talked about the historical sources of the myth. Unfortunately, a lot of these after chapters were not, and the choices she discussed in them seemed very arbitrary to me. And actually it was in the 5th little after chapter in here that I found the thing that I really did not like. She literally writes in it, "The above story is my own invention." And I'm like, well, what's the point? What's the point of that? What's the point of the book? Are you telling the stories of established myths and legends? Are you retelling or reimagining them and tweaking certain elements to fit a vision of the mythology that you want to represent? Or are you just making shit up to fix plot holes in stories I didn't know existed? You can't have all 3 of them at once, and I feel like the book is trying to. From that point onwards, I really lost faith in what the book was doing and every single story it was presenting. At times there's a lot of emphasis on discussing the historical context of the story and the culture at the time and the sources and the varying texts and the discrepancies and contrasting elements between them and how exactly she decided which elements to include and what felt the most true. And then other times she's like, oh yeah, I just made this up, like it sounded cool, it seemed like a good idea, I just made it up. I don't get the point of it. And also in the introduction to this book, she says that she really likes myths and legends and she started making wood carvings and artworks based on certain scenes in them. And a lot of them are included throughout here. And even this front cover, this front cover that I love so much and is so beautiful, is one of the author's own designs. And in the introduction, she's like, yeah, I did the wood carvings and then I wanted to write the stories to go along with them. And I'm like, maybe you shouldn't have. Maybe you should have just illustrated someone else's book on mythology and folklore, because the wood carvings aren't good enough for an entire book that cost me £25 to be written around them. So yeah, I mean, it's still a gorgeous book. It's still a gorgeous book. It's too heavy. It's still a gorgeous book. I am going to keep it. It's on my mythology and folklore shelf simply because it has stories in that I've never seen anywhere else. But I wouldn't recommend it. Unfortunately, with the next book I read, things were even worse. That book was The Maid by Nita Prose. I heard mostly positive things actually about this book, which is why I was so incredibly disappointed by it. I can't remember the last time I started the year and so quickly had a 1-star book. but that is what has happened this year. I ended up giving it 1.5 stars and I hated it a lot more than I thought I would. This is about a woman called Molly who works as a maid in a very fancy hotel, and then one day one of the guests dies and Molly accidentally finds herself as suspect number 1. That sounds interesting, but tell me how this book managed to fail on every single level. The mystery sucked. It wasn't really a mystery, it was just like a series of events that Molly blunders her way through that like the author tries to pass off as a plot. Molly as a main character, I'm so sorry. Everyone said that she was like really interesting and quirky and unusual, and I'm like, she's definitely quirky, but she just to me came across as so annoying and actually really stupid, to the point where I wanted to like reach through the pages and sort of just shake her a little bit and be like, come on, get a grip, get a grip. Nothing about this book was fun or enjoyable. I mean, every single page was a slog to get through, but somehow I did. And I hated the ending. Like it really just came out of nowhere. I thought I'd just read a very poorly done, mediocre book. And then I read the ending. I mean, literally, I think it was like the last 10 pages or something that came out of nowhere. And I was like, am I reading the same book? What the fuck is happening? It was awful. Like I physically hated it. It really, I'm still marveling about that. I think it would have been difficult, like actually difficult, to come up with a worse ending than the one we got. So I really did not like that one. So I decided to reread something fun and dumb. So I reread A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. And you know what? It was a good time. It was a reset. It was the perfect reset after 2 very disappointing books that my brain needed. I really enjoy like angsty Feyre, so I really like the first part of this book. Then when the plot kicks in, you know, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. It's basically how I would describe this. The Night Court is cool. The annoying characters, Cassian, are still annoying, but like everyone else is fine. I'm basically at the point where when I read this book, I will read the bits I enjoy and I'm like, yeah, fun. And then I'll read a bit I don't enjoy and I'm like, that did not happen. It does not enter my brain. I do not compute it. I'm just here to read the fun bits. So really the version of this book that has been processed and made its way inside my head, it's only the good bits. The version of this book inside my head is so much better than the book I'm physically holding, because when I read something I do not like, I'm like, didn't see that. That didn't happen. That was never written. I'm only here for the good stuff. I mean, there is almost too much plot in this book. I can admit I would have loved just a little bit more fluff sprinkled throughout. And the ending is still great. The ending is still, like, objectively this is not a good book, but objectively that ending actually is actually quite good. It's a very good, exciting, it's like one of the best cliffhangers I've ever read. Is that ridiculous to say? I think it might be. I think it's actually a really, really good ending. Like the stakes just keep going up and up and up and up. I will say, as with many Sarah J. Maas books, the ending has a lot of characters like miraculously surviving deadly injuries, but only main characters. I don't love that. I feel like certain people, kill him. I don't care. Don't care about him. I'm so sorry, but I'm not sorry. I don't care about him. He's really annoying. And the Prithian, the map of Prithian is still like the dumbest fantasy map in existence, but you know, it was a good time. I'm giving it this time around 3.5 stars. Then I was tempted to reread A Court of Silver Flames because that also has a very angsty character in it. And I was like, you know what? She writes angst in a way that I do enjoy from time to time. And this was one of those times. So I was wondering when I reread this, when I decided to reread this, if I would think it was better the second time around. I was actually inspired to reread this by Carrie Can Read because she's done like a really good series of recaps for the books in this series, and I've watched her recap video on A Court of Silver Flames an embarrassing number of times. So I was like, maybe I should actually reread the book a second time and see what I think. I did not think it was better the second time round. However, I do think I enjoyed it more simply because I knew exactly what kind of book I was getting and exactly what was going to happen. And again, I was cherry picking the good bits. I would read something I liked and I'd be like, yeah, you can go in the brain bank. And then I'd read something else and I'd be like, Cassian, no, pretend it did not happen, pretend I did not read that page. Which is maybe difficult because Cassian plays a large part in this book. He's somehow more annoying. He's somehow more annoying than I remembered. Nesta, my feelings have not changed. I still do not like her. And yet I read a ridiculously long book about her. Explain that. I still don't particularly like that a lot of the characters seem very different, like very out of character compared to how they were early in the books. I feel like Rhys in particular just gets really stupid in this book. He's not so much annoying, like he's presented as annoying because the characters, Nesta, the main character, finds him annoying. I'm like, that's fine. But he's presented, he just does like really dumb shit for like the entirety of the book. He's very ineffective and stupid in a way that I don't think is true to his character, just me personally. Also, spoilers. Spoiler. I don't like that the last bit of this book is basically a reenactment, an homage, if you will, to the birth scene in Breaking Dawn. I still thought that the second time round. I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. We're basically painting by numbers, we're ticking boxes, we're stealing everything from Breaking Dawn. Did not like it. Also don't like that Nesta like loses all her powers at the end when literally that was the only thing that made her interesting. However, it turns out that my sister has also read this and is now caught up on the ACOTAR series, but she was unaware of like the Crescent City series and shenanigans that have occurred at the end of the second book. I have also not read that series, but like I said, I have watched Carrick and Reed's recap videos on the first two books in the Crescent City series, again, numerous times because they're really fun videos. So I know all the goss and I know exactly what's going on, but my sister did not. And so the main perk of rereading A Course of the Flames was then getting to go and tell her everything that happened in the Crescent City books, because obviously it's going to be relevant in some way to the next ACOTAR book. So that was just a really fun discussion I got to have. Anyway, I then went on to finally read two objectively very good books. First of all, I reread A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. I read this first of all in August last year, so like 6 months ago, and I loved it even more the second time round. I've bumped up my rating to, I think, 4.5 stars because it's just excellent. This is set on a planet in the far future where one day, like an age ago, all of the robots on the planet gained sentience and went off into the wilderness to do their own thing and leave humanity behind, while human civilization like recovered because they basically pushed their planet to the brink, and now civilization has recovered and everything's great and everything's very sustainable, but no one has seen a robot in, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of years. Until our main character, who is a tea monk called Sibling Dex, meets a robot called Mosscap, and it's great. Short and sweet is pretty much the best way to describe this book, I think. It's pretty much perfect. And like I said in my wrap up last time I read this, I think it's unusual in that it's positive science fiction. Like, it's science fiction that you read and you get like warm and fuzzy inside, and it's about the future and it's positive, and I think that's rare. And I cried quite a lot when reading this book, and I don't often cry when reading. There really has to be some kind of perfect storm forming for me to tear up, and let me tell you, I wept when reading this. And also, I don't often pull quotes out of books while I'm reading them. That doesn't often happen. So the fact that I not only cried like a baby when reading this, but also actually was making notes of particular quotes in here, I think that just shows you how special this is. Like, some people may say it's cheesy. For me, it was perfect. Then I finally read the sequel, A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers, which, you know, follows the first book. Like, it's pretty much a direct continuation. I will say, first off, I didn't like it as much. I also don't think it felt as necessary or as essential as the first book. I kind of view A Psalm for the Wild-Built as like the main event, and this as a fun little bonus. And you know, it was a fun little bonus for what it was. It felt to me like a fun little bonus, and I think it was a good fun little bonus, but obviously it's a bonus, it's not the main event. That maybe feels like a contradiction to what I said in my last wrap up, where I was like, oh, I'd read 100 books about Dex and Mosscap and set in this world. And now I'm like, oh, 2 books is too many. No, I think think it was fine. I think it was good. I'm not 100% sure what my rating will be. Maybe 3, maybe 3.5 stars. But I do think you could just read the first one and it will be fine. But also this one is so fresh in my mind. I feel like maybe I just haven't processed it properly yet. Maybe I'll need to reread it after 6 months like I did with A Song for the Wild Built. And I'll, for some reason, just like get so much more from it. Well, not so much more, but maybe I'll enjoy it a lot more even. It might just be that I just need some time to process this and to reflect on it, and if I reread it in 6 months I'll end up feeling a lot more strongly and positively towards it. I mean, we can hope that would be a really nice outcome, to be honest, but this is how I'm feeling right now. This, again, I loved the world. It's such a cool, nice, sweet, positive, eco-friendly little world that they live in, and I loved hearing about that. I think this it sort of takes you on a little meander through some of the for lack of a better word, leftover philosophical and ethical discussions and questions from the first book in a way that, again, it's like a nice accompaniment to book 1, but it's, for me, not the main event. I found it very interesting and emotional, though I did not bawl my eyes out like I did with the first one. But overall, like, still a very good book, just not a great one, but still a very good book. So those are the 6 books I've read so far this year, and of the 6 of them, 3 of them were rereads. So I mean, am I even attempting to bring down my TBR? Not really. I have technically finished a series. I finished the Monk and Robot series. I don't think there's any plans for a 3rd book, so I've officially finished a series. That's nice, but I have barely scratched the surface of my actual TBR. But I'm having a good time, apart from those first 2 books. I'm having a good time. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.